We're on Daf Ayin Hey, and we're continuing in the sugya of Yeharg Val Yavar, and we spoke about Avizrayu de Gilia Rayos and Avizrayu de Avodah Zorah. So we remember that the Gemara wavered back and forth as to whether or not the Ben Noach is obligated in Yeharg Val Yavar in a case where they forced him to worship an idol. And Abai says, well, then you're adding another mitzvah. And Rava said, no, it's Inu V'chal Avizrayu, as if to say the din of Yeharg Val Yavar is included under Avodah Zarah. So once we have this concept of Avizrayu to Avodah Zarah, we want to try to see if we can apply that to other Averos, like, for example, to Gilia Rai. So that's going to be the story here of Ma'aser Badavecha. So that's here on Daf Ayin Hey and Me'alef. Okay, now let's say the following. We discussed in the past the shita of the Balamor that Yeharg Val Yavar applies when he's being nene, he's getting benefit from Atzei Asherah. And it seems that the Balamor was saying that there's an Isur Hanoah from Avodah Zarah. And if, let's say, the Rofim would say that the only way he could survive is by applying the Asherah, let's say a serum or a sap from the Asherah, therefore would be violation of Hanoah Avodah Zarah, he has to give up his life for that. So we could say that Hatzalah cannot come through the Avera. In this case, the Avera of Avodah Zarah. So if he would heal himself and save his own life by violating an Isur of Avodah Zarah, he's not allowed to do that. Just like we discussed in the past that you can't save your life at the expense of someone else's death, even if you don't directly kill him. So too here in Avodah Zarah, you cannot save your life if you're a chole and be misrape and regain your health and save your life through a chefetz of Avodah Zarah. But it's not really the emphasis on the Isur of Avodah Zarah so much. It's the emphasis on, as we said before, if another child is taken in place of his child, that, he's not involved in Ritzicha. So there's no violation of the Isur Ritzicha, but it's so to speak a chefetz of Ritzicha. It's a kind of indirect rumowness of Ritzicha. And therefore, if he drinks the water, and as a result his friend will perish, that also is a violation of a kind of Ritzicha. I mean, he's saving his life through the death of someone else. So here, he's saving his life through the use of a chefetz of Avodah Zarah, the Asherah tree, Atzei Asherah. Now, there's an issue in the poskim. Let's say he could apply this remedy from an Asherah shel Avodah Zarah in a shalo kederech hana'asam, in an unusual way, in a backhand way. So as far as the Avera of Avodah Zarah is concerned, obviously, since it was shalo kederech hana'aso, it's not the full-fledged violation of the Isur. So if you talk about the Isur of Hanoah from Avodah Zarah, which is called Lo Yidbak Mi'uma Min Acherim, Lo Yidbak B'cha Mi'uma Min Acherim, then in the case of Shalo Kederech Hana'asam, it's not a full-fledged violation of Lo Yidbak B'yodcha, Lo Yidbak Ba. But nevertheless, there's a separate Isur not to be misrape from Avodah Zarah, from a chefetz of Avodah Zarah, or for that matter, from a chefetz of Gili Arayis, as we'll soon see, or Vritzicha. So therefore, it might be that the poskim would be machmir here, and they would not even allow him to be nene from Avodah Zarah, from an Asherah tree, even if it was Shalom Kederech Hanasa. Because at the end of the day, he's doing Hatzalah through a chefta of Avodah Zarah. And this leads us to our Gemara for today, Omer Rav Yehuda Marav. So we're on Daf Ayin Hey Amid Aleph, and we are on the second line of the Amud. Maisa biyadam echad. We're talking about a story here that happened, and this is actually, a horala maisa from the Chachamim of that generation that that were involved in issuing a halachic verdict regarding this particular man. And we're going to derive from this the scope and the application of the din of Yeharg Val Yav in the case of Arayos. So he wanted to have a relationship with this woman, and vehela libatino. As a result of his passion, his lave literally became ill, and his heart could be broken, and he'll die. Bo v'sholu l'rofem ein lo takana ad shetiboil. The only way we could save this man is if he has a relationship with this woman. So the question came in front of the Chachamim, could we allow it? Omru Chachamim Yamus, let him die from his psychological illness. V'alti boil. Now they asked the Rofim, and they said, wait a minute. What happens if Tamod Lefanav Haruma? Maybe he'll live if he can see her body. Maybe that's enough to save him. And therefore there's no violation of Gili Arayis. He will not have to have a Be'ilah with her. We'll have to see if she was married or not. And the Chachamim responded, Yomos ve'al Tamod Lefanav Haruma. Tesaper imo mechorei agoder, Yomos ve'lo tesaper imo. Now, was she married or was she not? Pligi ba Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. Chad Omar Eishes Ish Hoysa. Chad Omar Pnuya Hoysa. Now, I'd like to take a look at note number Hey on the third line. Hagmar via Maises rak bishvil lilmod mimenu es chomer din Yeharg val yav barayos ulefichach lo aricha beprat of aflo kosva ma ola begorolo shaloso ish. Now he quotes the Chida. Zeu ha'maisa muve berashi li'el daf lamed aleph amid beis dimra maskal l'duye. Shemotzu b'sefer agod shehutzuchu lavos mimeno mitov dochka nisratzeis lo achu kovash yisro patro l'shalom v'oz israpi micholya me'oso hayom hayener min hashemaim dolek al rosho ki sheyotza l'shalom karo Rabbi Nasan Tzutzisa al Shem Ha'or. Okay, fine. L'chayra kosher. There's a stira here in this story because initially the Rofim said ein lo takona ad shetiboil. Eich chazru, this number ches, eich chazru lehem harofim. How could they change their mind? And now they're saying, well, maybe this is enough, and she doesn't have to. So we have here 4 answers to this question. We're going to try to go through them. Number 1 is the Chavas Yoyer. His name was Bachra, lived about 5 centuries ago. Shaliacher shelo itiru chacham lasos ki divrei harishonim. If in their original stand that tiboilo, that's his only remedy, the Chachamim insisted that we're not going to apply that remedy, we'll let him die. So now the Rofim said, you know what? Let's do everything we can to possibly save his life. And if the Chachamim will not give license to the ultimate, then let's try something less. The Aruch LaNer, on the other hand, says, Shesheker haya b'fiyim shel harofim kshamu ein lo takona shibol.
I'm sorry, where are we in Sanhedrin?
We're in number ches.
What daf?
On Ayin Hey Amud Aleph.
In Sanhedrin.
Right. Now, I have to tell you this, Nason. Our star pupil, that's Steve Adler, who always sends around the sources, is now away. So he won't be back until Wednesday. So I'm going to keep up the shiurim as regular today and tomorrow. And then Tuesday, I'm going to take off I have a backlog of work here to organize my recorded shiurim. And then Mitzvah Hashem on Wednesday, I'll be back. And please remind me, if you don't have Steve's address, to,
I have his WhatsApp, yeah.
Oh, good. So ask him. Again, you won't be able to get to him until Wednesday, but ask him for the future to give you, unless you have access to Masifta. Is it possible that where you are, there's Masifta?
Masifta? You mean the book Masifta?
No, the Gemara Masifta. It's like what?
I don't really use it. I have Oitzer Chachma, which I can send you copies of from Makoros if you want for the show.
The problem with Oitzer Chachma as opposed to Masifta is that the Masifta in one paragraph, gives you the Chavas Yoyer, the Aruch LaNer, the Ein Yaakov, and the Metzudas David, all together in one little paragraph. So in Otzach we'd have to really spend an hour trying to dig up all these pages.
Well, I have Masifta in Otzach Chachma. Let me see what the copyright rules are. I might be able to, if it's a small portion, I might be able to send it.
Right, it could be a small portion.
I think I can. If it's a certain Nakuda from Masifta, I think I can, but I can't send pages of it.
The expert on this in our group is Yechiel Prince. He used to be able to do these magical things and help us out. But I moved to Efrat, so I'm not really in touch with Yechiel. I should be, but I'm not. So anyway, just to summarize, so the Chavas Yoyer says that the situation was such that the Rofim were desperate. They tried besafek, maybe they could save this man's life. However, the Aruch LaNer says that the entire business from the Rofim was sheker v'chazal. And when they said, quote, Elo takonat shetiboilo, that was sheker v'chazal. And they realized at some point that they were not in any way successful with their attempt. They wanted to see the violation of, we'll see according to what man the Amr Ish. So finally the Rofim take a backseat position and said, well, you know what? Maybe we don't have to go that far. We don't have to give him a violation of Gili Arayis. We'll offer us a fallback position. But the bottom line of the Aruch LaNer, it's interesting because he was a philosophy student in university, and his Talmud Muvak was Rav Shimshon Fol Hirsch. But he says about these Rofim, Rofim command a lot of respect. He says about them, Kol Divreim Hevel Havol. I did not expect that from the Aruch LaNer. Then we get to the Ein Yaakov. He says that it was the Chazal that suggested the fallback position. It wasn't the Rofim. Even though it says, Omru Chachamim Yomus V'al Tiboilo, period, and the assumption of all the commentaries is that at that point they went back to the Rofim, but that's not what happened. And it doesn't say explicitly in the Gemara in the story that they went back to the Rofim. So rather, the Chachamim themselves, after they heard the prognosis from the Rofim, they went back and they said, you know what? Maybe we could suggest another possibility. And the Ein Yaakov writes that Gam ilu hayu arofim omrim rak tamod, etc. O tedaber imo lo hayu matirim zos. In other words, the Chachamim made a statement that was purely theoretical. They wanted to convey a halachic principle that was not relevant to the case at hand. Because in the scenario at hand, there was no possibility of saving this man's life except if there would be a Gili Arayis Mamish. So this whole discussion about Talmud L'fanav Aruma or Tsaper Imo Me'achorei Agade, all that was the way that Chachamim presented a halacha in a theoretical sense, as a matter of principle, that even if the Rofim would have said this or would have said that, we would still not allow that to happen. He would have to die. Now, there are 2 points here in the Ein Yaakov that are very, very relevant to us. Number one, the Ein Yaakov gives us the broadest definition of Avizrayu de Gili Arayos, that even to Saper Imo Me'achorei Agode, that itself is Avizrayu to Avodah Zarah, and this fits very well with our understanding of the Baal Hamor, that Avizrayu to Avodah Zarah is not a question of the violation of the Isur. The Baal Hamor even has a case where he takes the Asherah tree, which is Avodah Zarah, and he's nene from the Asherah tree, which is not a violation of Gili Arayos, it's a separate violation of Lo Yidbak Ba'ach Me'uma Min Acherim. But you can't save yourself through a refuah that comes derech Avodah Zarah. And that's called Avizrayu Avodah Zarah. To save yourself through some sort of cheft of Avodah Zarah, if we could use that term, even without the violation of the Isra Avodah Zarah, that's not mut. So here also, to Saper Imo Me'achorei Agoder, there's no violation of the Isra Gili Arayos. But nevertheless, he's being nene from an erva. And that itself comes under this principle, which we clarified through the Baal Hamor, that you cannot save your life through some sort of chefta of Gili Arayos. Baal Hamor was talking about a case of a chefta of Avodah Zarah, and that was the Asherah tree. So they extracted the serum. And in the case of Tisaper Imo Me'achorei Agoder, that's called Hanoah from the erva herself. And if your Hanoah from the erva herself will save your life, Yehareg al Yav. So it wasn't true for that particular scenario of the Maaseh B'Adam Echad, but it was true as a halachic principle. And finally, he quotes the Mitzudas David, She'amru shalachai sho yo'ilu lo gam dvarim elu, Avol hatzola gemura hoyselo ledivreim rak bebilos. Interesting. Where is this Metzudas David, by the way? Metzudas David is a commentary on Nach by Rabbi David Pardo. Nowhere in Nach do we have this story that we're reading about here in the Gemara, but somehow the Ein Yaakov got a hold of what's called Chidushei HaGaonim, and he published it on the side of the Ein Yaakov. It's called Chidushei HaGaonim. I don't have it with me right now, but you could see it in the old-fashioned Mishnayos or in the Ein Yaakovs that they published, when we were children. I mean, the real sophisticated ones, not the English translations. They won't have the Chidushei HaGaonim. But anyway, in the Chidushei HaGaonim, they have this Chiddush from the Metzudas David. Metzudas David, by the way, lived about 4.5 centuries ago in Italy. And in that quote, he's saying that there's something called Chaye Shah in the case of this Adam Echad, Shenosan Eno Bisha Achas. And although, as the Rofim had determined, he would not survive unless the Ilah, but nevertheless, we could extend his life a little bit by Tamod Lefon of Aruma or Tisaper Ima Me'achorei Agod. So it's interesting here, if we summarize the four approaches here, that according to 3 out of the 4 approaches, the Rofim are reliable. They're just on the side. This has to do with, the Ramban and Kisvei Ramban and the halachas of Yom Kippurim, and do we rely on the Rofim? 3 out of 4 of the interpretations claim that the Rofim were reliable. It's only the Aruch LaNer of all people who says that the Rofim were full of Hevel Havolim. That's all. Okay, so let's go through the other 3 interpretations. According to the Chavas Yair, the Rofim were recalculating, and they thought that, okay, maybe he would survive with these secondary kinds of things. We don't know for sure he's going to survive, but it's a suffix. And then we have the Ein Yaakov, Iyun Yaakov technically, and he's saying that the Chachamim were making a theoretical statement that we wouldn't even allow something less than Be'ilah. And that expands the definition of Avizrayu to Gili Arayis to include any Anah from the Erev. Now, before we get to the Metzudas David, in the Iyun Yaakov, I don't believe that we should formulate it as any hana. I mean, I live near a very, very religious neighborhood here. And when you go to the cashier, you may find a married woman there. So are you going to tell me I'm being nana because she's calculating my groceries? I mean, obviously I have to be careful, that I shouldn't, but should look at her or whatever it is. But nobody would say that there's an Iser Hana from a cashier who's calculating how much you owe you. And then it becomes the Yored Val Yav. Again, you want to have an extra level of Chasidus and Harchaka, Asus Yagla Torah. I'm not saying maybe you shouldn't hire a married woman as a cashier. I don't know. That's an interesting question in and of itself. I would probably take a little bit more of a liberal stand on that. But, I could hear very well that, what he means by Hana here, the Yaakov. And therefore, even if the Rofim would just say to Daber Imo mi b'mokom seiser, I have a feeling that what he means is a hana from the erva as a kiruv basar. The Rambam against the Ramban.
If I'm not, I'm sorry for interrupting. It's and maybe this is what you're saying also. If I'm not mistaken, the isser is to do something l'shem hana. So even to speak with her means you're speaking with her l'shem hana. If it's some type of form of misasik that hana comes, but that's not the main purpose of the speech. Whatever the halachas are of how much you have to be careful is a separate discussion. That's not what we're talking about. Yarog vel Yavor.
Right.
The Chazal made this extra gather, which means he did it just the Shem Hana.
Right.
If the Hana came as a side effect, but there was a completely separate purpose, then we wouldn't have been gozer it.
Right. The everything you say, Nosson, is correct. The only problem is that I'm afraid to use the word misasek in arayas because the Gemara actually says that in the case of misasek in arayas, he's chayav a korban. Normally, misasek is potter from a korban, but in the case of misasek, or even in chalovim, let's say he thinks it's shuman and he eats it and it turns out to be chaylev, he has to bring a korban for that. And if a man would have a relationship with an Arab. But you're right. I mean, there is.
What you're saying is also true. First of all, I'm saying we're not talking about Maisa Bia, but even if it was a Maisa Bia, he's not Chayiv Misa for Misasik Beres.
Right. But I think what we're talking about here, Lefiani's Daiti, is what I call about a Hanov Kiruv Basar. What do I mean by Kiruv Basar? And here I want to invoke, there's a machlok between the Rambam and the Ramban regarding the Pasuk. In Nida, it says Isha betumas nidasa al tikravu. And what does al tikravu mean? The Ramban is of the opinion that that's sort of a general commandment to the Chachamim to make harchakos, al tikravu, and set up harchakos. But the Rambam in Hilchas Yisur Bia learns that that's a lav d'oraisa of kirva lierva, of, let's say, chibuk v'nishuk, and according to some interpretations of the Rambam, any pleasure that he gets from her in a sexual area, meaning in terms of her being a woman, as opposed to being a man, in the cashier case, that becomes a lav d'oraisa, according to the Rambam. And in the framework of the Rambam, I believe that this Iyun Yaakov takes on a greater meaning. And he's saying that to saper imo me'achore agode, they sneak out to a private place and they have a shmooze, that itself is considered a kirva li'erva. In fact, yichud might even be d'oraisa according to the Rambam. And this is not my own chiddush, but there are Rishonim who classify yichud as d'oraisa. Now, what kind of doraisa? Where does the Torah? Again, the Gemara at the end of Kiddushin has some sort of a remez, from the parsha of Mesis Umeidiach, but there's no isa doraisa of yichud. I mean, this is very important in terms of Daf Yomi of Sota, where he says altisteri and ploni. So yichud is only an isa d'Rabbanan, but yet many Rishonim seem to assume that it comes under lo sikravu. And it's very strange. There's no negias basar here. It's a man and a woman in a private place. But the answer is he's being nene from an isha, not because she's giving him change from his dollar bill, but because she's a woman. And that pleasure is a violation of lo sikravu. The truth of the matter is that even if I accept the Ramban's view that kirva le'erva, like chibuk and nishuk and so forth, is not a violation of a doraisa, and it's only a harchaka d'Rabbanan, even so, midrabbanan, it has the status of avizrayu de gilarayis. And that leads us to another question. as to whether or not a D'Rabbanan could be recognized under Avizrayu for the purpose of Yehareg Val Yavam. And I don't know if you heard of the first chief rabbi of Israel. His name is Rav Unterman. Does that name ring a bell? I don't know. And he writes that in the Shoah, there were Jews who were killed by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, because they refused the Nazi command to go into a private room with a woman, with a Jewish woman. And it has nothing to do with Shas Hashmad. It wasn't like the Nazis wanted to get him to violate Isur Yichud. That wasn't it. But, they refused the order in order not to violate Yichud. And I would assume that would apply even to Yichud D'Rabbanan, even without Shas Hashmad, even if it's not Lavuri al Das Komis Kavin, because of this halacha of Avizrayu de Gili Arayos, which would mean that Avizrayu might even incorporate a D'Rabbanan of Yichud, if you hold like the Ramban, that Yichud is only D'Rabbanan. Which, by the way, is the generally accepted view.
I don't understand that Chiddush, because with the Nazis, they're threatening to kill her. And the question is, obviously, if they're miskavin Lavur Das or for a separate reason, but they're threatening to kill her. Here, it's really Sheval Taisa. No one's killing him. He's just going to die, out of his
natural
own
death. You mean so to speak.
Natural death. Here, she's actually putting herself in danger. I don't think she would have a heter unless there was some type of kavana Lavur Das.
So that, again, let's just make sure we're on the same page. Rav Unterman said that they gave up their lives to avoid Yichud. And I'm saying that and I'm just saying that if you assume that Yichud is D'Rabbanan, which is, again, 98% of the poskim, then you're redefining Avizrayu de Gili Arayos to include even a D'Rabbanan. So if I equate to Saper Imo Mechore Agode with Yichud, and according to the Yaakov, the Chachamim were pointing out that even had the Rofim said that we could save him with Tesaper Imo, he would still die, and they would not allow license for it. I'm thinking out loud that might be a support for the possible position that Avizrayu de Gili Arayos would include even a violation of a D'Rabbanan, if it's Avizrayu de Gili Arayos. I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, that's a scary kind of chiddush with tremendous repercussions. And this is where we quote the famous Reb Chaim. The Reb Chaim says that when Rabbi Akiva disagreed with Ben Petura in the case of two people in the desert in Bab Metzia Samach Beis, and Rabbi Akiva says V'cheachicha imach, and he's allowed to drink the water, Ben Petura says split the water. So Reb Chaim says that if not for the drush of Rabbi Akiva on the pasuk imach, Rabbi Akiva would have agreed to Ben Petura. They would have to split the water. And Reb Chaim asks why. Like the first Reb Chaim in the Sefer. And Reb Chaim answers, because for him to drink the water, since the water represents the life of the other fellow, then he would be saving his own life at the expense of someone else's life. Which means that according to Reb Chaim's understanding of Rabbi Akiva, if let's say he doesn't own the water, so it's not v'cheachicha imach, then he's not permitted to drink the water and witness the death of his friend, which means he can't save himself. Like you would think, well, kol hakodim zocha, right? Two people fell overboard or the ship was capsized, and now there's a life buoy, and there's only one life buoy. It should be kol hakodim zocha. If I could nudge you out, so to speak, or jump on the, and if there's water to be had, it doesn't belong tonight to me or to you. Let me just grab onto the water and save myself. No. The cheachicha imach means because it's your water, but it's not your water, and Yenim has the same rights to the water as you do, then Ben Petura is right. You got to split the water, which is mind-boggling of a chiddush. But Reb Chaim is medayik, as he often does, because of the fact that the Gemara needs a yalfusa, that Rabbi Akiva relied on a pasuk, and then we have to see what would have been before the pasuk, without the pasuk, and now after the pasuk, under what circumstances, and we have to be very limited, do we apply the pasuk? You know, you start with an assumption that includes from A to Z, and then you quote a pasuk, and you exclude from that pasuk A to, let's say, S, but after S, you include it. And that's what we do. We go back to the original position of Ben Petura of Yichalku Amayim, because you can't save yourself, and at that expense, somebody else has died. The Lamaisa is it that if it's your water, you don't have to give up your water in order to save him and you die, because Chayecha Kodm. But without the Chayecha Kodm derived from a pasuk, we would split the water, even according to Rabbi Akiva. It's a pella because, you know, whenever we learn that Gemara, and if you're learning contemporary halacha, you always end up with that Gemara. You know, all sorts of cases of a train coming and, you know, can you veer off the train? You know, the famous trolley case, you know, you kill 2 people and save 5 people. All these cases, they come up in the Israeli army, they discuss this in all the time. And they always quote Ben Petura as making no sense whatsoever. Forget about Ben Petura, you know. It's crazy. Split the water, they both die, right? And you have 15 different answers to that question. You know, the one I like, my favorite, is that, you know, maybe they'll both live with half the water another 10 minutes. And that leads me to the last answer of the Metzudas David as quoted here in the Yun Yaakov, namely that there's something called Chai Shah, that maybe if he's going to be Mesaper Imo Me'achore Agader, then maybe he'll live another few minutes. You know, we'll forestall his death. And the Gemara assumes that Chai Shah, every minute of life is considered like Chai Olam. And therefore you would say that for the sake of saving him, even for a few minutes, we might allow Yavor V'Yihare, because saving him for a few minutes is equivalent to saving his life. Because Chai Shah, Nikraim Shah, Chashuvim Shah, Chashuvim Chaim. Yeah, what were you going to say, Nosson? Sorry.
I think I remember seeing in the Masechet actually on this sugya many years ago. There was one of the Achronim that has an interesting shot. They said, well, the truth is, we have the klal, you know, of the v'chayibim, right? So he said the truth is that this was an interesting halacha. It's halacha vein morinkin. If a person wanted to do it, there'd be mekai in the midst of the v'chayibim. But that's if they don't ask a shaila. But if they ask a shaila, that's what Chazal was goes there. You have to tell them no because of Gamishkafa and what Gemara says in the end for all the negative. So
look, Nelson, all I could say to you is Ein L'dayin Ela Ma She'ein Avros. If you get a chance, I know your schedule is very busy, but see if you could dig that up.
Is there more than one Gemara that speaks about this case, or is it just this? Maybe in a different Masechet to that.
Let me see if there's any tziyun here in the Ein Mishpat. Let me just see. I don't find it. I know it from Sanhedrin, but maybe it's elsewhere as well.
I'm happy, please, Neder. I'm happy to take a look, and also
right, if you get a chance, if you have access to Masifta.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
My ever know that I'm a wild fan of Masifta. You know, it's like mi pivanu chayim.
Let's say that, very nice.
Let's just add a few more lines, 5 more minutes. Pligi bar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. We don't know who holds what. Chad Omer Eishes Ish Haisa, v'Chad Omer Pnuya Haisa. Bishleim Lamandi Omer Eishes Ish Haisa Shapir. You know, now we're talking about Gilead Rayas. And therefore we understand Yeharg Val Yava. El Lamandi Omer Pnuya Haisa. My Kule Hai. Do we have to apply the principle of Yeharg Val Yavar that he shouldn't violate a relationship with a pnuya, he adds here in the name of the Rambam that we're talking about a pnuya tahora. Okay, so there's no isakaris of nida, so that we've ruled out. Habal pnuya, let's say, for example, he violates Kedesha or he violates the Isar Kiyikach, but it certainly is not one of the Averos Chamuros. It doesn't come under Gili Arayis. So therefore, if she was a pnuya, why does he have to give up her life? And I suspect, Nosson, that maybe what you had in mind when you reminded yourself might be the next piece of Gemara. I don't know. But in any event, the Rambam holds that in the case of Bias Pnuya, there's a lav of Kedesha. The Ravid disagrees. The Ravid is famous for saying at the beginning of Hilchos Isur Bia that Kedesha is only mufkeres lakol. However, even according to the Ravid, there's an Isur of Bias Pnuya under Kiyikach Ishisha, which would mean a bittul mitzvah bekum vaseh. Now, this is really a heavy issue, which I don't know if I can take on now. What's the status of a bittul mitzvah bekum vaseh? Is it the same as violating an isur, or it's just the same as non-fulfillment of an essay? Like, let me give you an example. I don't know if it's a good example, but let's say on the first day of Sukkot, you give me a lulav, and I rip the lulav to shreds. That's what you call a bittul essay bekum vaseh. I actively will mevatel the essay. Normally, bittul essay is b'shevi altas. So if a man has a ma'aseh bia with a pnuya, that's an active bittul essay of kiddushay isha. And the Ravid holds that bias pnuya is not an isur violation of kiddesha because she's not mufkeres lakol, presumed, but rather it's a violation of kiyikach ishisha. So Rav Papa gives a very strange answer here, which requires a lot of understanding. Mishum gam mishpach. A man is going to die because this woman is going to cause a busha to her family. What is that all about? Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika Amar Kidei Shelo Yu Bnos Yisrael Prutzis Barayos, that this was a special takana, what we might call Harash Shah, in order to protect the integrity or the purity of Bnos Yisrael, that they shouldn't become Prutzos Barayos. So, maybe it's, we're going to allow this to go on because otherwise this guy is going to die. You could come up with all sorts of, more heter that it should be allowed. And the Chacham had to take a very important stand on this. And this brings us to the whole question of Harash Shah, whether or not Harash Shah is enough for the Chachamim in a case of need, they would allow a person to die, or shall we say, indirectly causing his death. How far do we go with this principle of Shelo Yiyu Bnos Yisrael Prutzos Barayos? In other words, do we go as far as to bring about the death of a person, which, assuming we, in 3 out of 4 of the portion, we rely on the Rofim, for the sake of protecting Bnos Yisrael from being Prutzos Barayos? Now, I'm going to need your help on access to the Encyclopedia Talmudit, if somebody could do that for me. There's an erech, there's an entry that's called Harash Shah. Does anybody have access to that? I mean, I gave my encyclopedia away with 31 boxes to Har Choma. So did I ever tell you they called me up to say, "Oh, you lost the book here. Somebody found a book with my name in it. Want to be Mekayim Hashavas Aveda." I say you can keep it. So in the encyclopedia, there's a very, very fine piece of research, as all their pieces are, called Harash Shah. And I believe he quotes this Gemara of Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika. So if anyone could help me with that, that would be great. we could send it out on the WhatsApp. All right, then. So we're going to conclude here. And thank you for joining us today. And Mirza Hashem, tomorrow we have a Daf Yomi at 7:15. And then I have a Daf Yomi Be'iyun Shir at 8:30. Mirza Hashem will be talking about the Sugya of Egla Rufa, but Be'iyun. And then I have the... No, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. That's Tuesday. Tomorrow is Monday. I skipped a day. Sorry. So tomorrow we have at 9:35 Sachim, and then at 11 a.m. we're analyzing the Ramban and Shroshim in Shorosh Aleph, and that's followed by the Ramban al Torah of Parshas Bamidbar, or maybe we'll go back to Parshas Bahar. I don't know. We'll see. And that's at 12:15. Okay, then. And then tomorrow night, if anyone's interested, at 7:30, I give a shir in Ivrit on the sugya of Egla Rufa. All right, then. So the Egla Rufa will be in two parts. There'll be a part on Sunday night at 7:30 and another part on Tuesday morning at 8:30. All right, then.
Okay, Vasesh, go off.
Just say that.
I'm a little bit confused.